I think it's typical Russian negotiating style. They always will have maximum demands. They'll never offer any concession at the start, and indeed will hold out for the maximum demand right until the very last minute, and then they might make a small concession. Or indeed, what the real negotiating tactic is, they'll hold out to the last minute, make some slight concession, agree a deal, and then just as they're about to sign the deal, they'll say one small point and they'll go back to the original demand in the hope that the other side will be so infuriated and worn down, they say, all right then, and in fact they'll then get everything they want. I mean, they've tried this time and time again. It's anyone who's had to deal with Russian negotiators knows that's how they work. And they play on the other side, losing patience and getting frustrated and sort of finally feeling, all right, we'll do a deal of some kind or other. So one doesn't know. I mean, whether Trump has been briefed on this or whether he thinks he knows Putin well enough to get some kind of guarantee that something will come of this, we simply can't tell. And the other big question, of course, is whether Putin will agree to Zelensky being at the talks. Mm-hmm. He's been very hostile to that idea in the past. Trump suggested that he was not against the three of them in the talks, but he's not really given Zelensky any promise that he can attend these Budapest meetings. We don't know how many there'll be, probably just one, but there's no indication that the invitation extends to Zelensky as well.
Indeed. And from the position Putin is in right now, he has his second meeting, but is there any sign he can actually cinch some sort of strategic win here, apart from just being able to kick the can down the road on Tomahawk? At Alaska, he seemed to go off on this odd diatribe about Russian and Eastern European history and Ukraine. As we say, Peskov's already turned down Trump's demand to freeze the battle lines. Is there any sign that Putin really has the diplomatic capability to secure anything in Budapest?
Not sure. I mean, I think the answer is probably no. He simply believes that with enough persistence and by wearing down the Ukrainians, that in the end he'll win what he wants militarily. And it's certainly clear that the Ukrainians are suffering. They are subject to daily and nightly attacks, not only on their cities, on their infrastructure. Particularly the Russians have now been going for the railways, which are vital in helping Ukraine survive this onslaught, and for transporting people and weapons around the country, very important. So the Russians are keeping up the barrage of military attacks. But beyond that, I don't think Putin has any particular offer or any particular other interest, apart from relief from sanctions, which the economy certainly needs, and talking to Trump about a possible new Russian-American trade deal sometime in the future. It's all a bit in the future. That is assuming there's a deal on Ukraine, but that's absolutely not in the bag by any means. So we don't know. Now, this talk about the Baltics, I think this was a bit of Putin's own paranoia coming out. I mean, he has this fixation about Russia re-engaging in the areas where it used to be all supreme. I mean, either the former Soviet republics, of which the Baltics are three of them, or those areas where he feels that Russia still should have a commanding say, and that these countries, the near abroad, as he would call it, should be institutionally friendly towards Moscow.
And is there a risk, though, for Putin if he goes into this second meeting with Trump and he comes back with nothing? I mean, we assume that's Putin's objective, is just to have these meetings and not agree to anything. But if these US-backed deep strikes that Ukraine have been carrying out, largely with their own weapons, carry on, and Putin can't get Trump to reel them in at all, and he comes back with just nothing again, is that still a positive for Putin domestically?
Well, I think Trump will suffer if people point the finger and say, you are a mug. You've been duped yet again. I mean, the last thing Trump ever wants is for people to say you've been taken in, you've been outsmarted. He thinks he's the smartest diplomat going. And that is an impression strongly reinforced by getting a ceasefire, at least in Gaza. We haven't got much further than a ceasefire, and even that is looking a bit shaky. But he came back from Gaza feeling his personal intervention had really worked a miracle. Now, his supporters and his flatterers will tell him that. But even they would be hard-pressed if he comes back with nothing from Budapest to say, well, what have you got this time? So he does need to have something that he can show, and Putin probably could think of some kind of minor concession. He might say, we're ready to swap this territory or withdraw from this territory. There are several bits that are not in the Donbass region where the Russians are there in force around Kherson and towards Odessa, around there. But whether he's willing to, I don't know. I mean, Trump doesn't seem to mind that people say you haven't got anything. He then goes off on another tangent. And the thing is, it depends how long he keeps focused on any particular issue. If he doesn't get anything from Budapest, he might suddenly revert back to peacemaking in the Middle East and say, well, look, it's time I use my influence there again. He wants to keep in the headlines and make it look as though he's still moving forward.
And what does the situation for Putin look like domestically?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, Putin is in absolute and total overall control, as far as we know. But we do know also that the economy, although it's stood up very well over the past 2 or 3 years to sanctions, it is suffering from these sanctions. If it can't sell its oil, and it may be that India listened to President Trump and is not going to go on buying Russian oil. If it can't sell its oil, it's got a huge drop in its income. It's not able to invest in anything other than the military at the moment. They have huge investments in the military, which in a funny way sort of gave a boost to the economy, but not really in the right way, not in the long term, not productively, just boosted the defense industries. And also there is this feeling that there's a groundswell of rather surly, still suppressed, but really angry reaction among younger people, among obviously the mothers of those who've been killed, and among many Russians who say, how long is this war going to go on? When's it ending? When do we see something happening? If we haven't got victory, why don't we just stop? And Putin's got to find a way to either give them something that he can proclaim as a victory, or to find some way to actually stop the fighting.
And where does that leave, these Russian energy problems that they're having as a result of Ukraine's strikes? The shortages are now beginning to affect some pretty big Russian cities. If there ends up being these massive fuel shortages and queues reaching Moscow and happening quite frequently in Moscow, does that create more of a risk for the Kremlin and for Putin? Because there's a difference, isn't there, between big major cities in Russia politically from, the eastern provinces and even much of the rest of the country?
Oh, absolutely. The only two cities that really matter are Moscow and St. Petersburg. And, of course, they are by far the biggest cities. But there are some other big ones. I mean, if you go to the sort of central area, you've got, cities like medium-sized Voronezh, or you've got cities out further east. You've got Nizhny Novgorod. You've got several cities where they don't get the privileged treatment that Moscow and Petersburg get, and where the call-up lists have been longer. There have been more people recruited outside Moscow. Very, very few young people of military age have been called up in Moscow or Petersburg because they know that they probably have parents who may be fairly influential or fairly well-to-do or can pull strings or could make a lot of fuss if their sons are called up and then killed. And that is not what Putin wants on his own doorstep.
And we mentioned Russia's strikes on Ukraine before. Whenever there is one of these large meetings, the Russians seem to want to make a point of trying to either take some land or bombard Ukrainian cities more than they regularly would anyway. But that has a bit of a paradoxical effect, doesn't it? Because the more powerful they appear to militarily on the battlefield in Ukraine, the more they seem to turn Trump or Melania sometimes back against the Russians because they end up having so many civilian casualties. Yes,
well, I mean, Trump has said in quite a few words, quite harsh words, he said things like, I don't like it. Well, he's not actually said this is a dreadful war crime or anything like that. He just said he should stop doing it. I don't like all these deaths. Well, nobody likes it. I mean, obviously that has upset him, and it's bad for the image of the West to see this thing happening to an ally they're supposed to be supporting. And I think that does anger and upset Trump, and he sort of feels that Putin is just carrying on doing what he wants to do, regardless of whatever threats or influence Trump has. Now, Trump has threatened to do various things, like introduce new sanctions or like try to tighten up secondary sanctions on other countries, all sorts of things. But he's never really followed through. And that's been the sort of pattern. And I think the Russians sort of feel, well, he can say what he likes, but we're just going to continue doing what we want. And I have to say that these drone attacks have been pretty serious. Now, one of the reasons that Zelensky wanted Tomahawk missiles is that they would have been able to hit those centers of production where these drones are being turned out by the hundreds, where the Russians have really hunkered down in making these things, which are very effective. Swarms of them go across every night. And these Tomahawks could possibly have severely damaged those factories. They've certainly damaged the energy supplies. They've damaged oil refineries and things like that. And as you said, that has affected the economy quite a lot. And that will be seen at queues at petrol pumps, in the major cities.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.